The announcement blared through the airport speakers with mechanical urgency, each word hitting Emma Brooks like a hammer blow to her chest. Final boarding call for Flight 287 to Seattle. All passengers must board immediately. This is the final boarding call. Emma felt her heart skip not just one beat, but several, as if her entire cardiovascular system had momentarily forgotten its purpose. She ran through Cleveland Hopkins International Airport with the desperation of someone fleeing a burning building. Her worn sneakers, Converse All-Stars she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, clicking against the polished airport tiles in a staccato rhythm that matched her racing pulse. Her second-hand coat, a navy blue wool blend she'd found at Goodwill with a barely noticeable stain on the left sleeve, flapped behind her like the wings of some desperate bird trying to achieve flight. The coat had cost her $12, which had felt like a fortune at the time, but she'd needed something professional-looking for the interview that could change everything. Her eyes scanned the gate numbers in a frantic blur, C10, C11, C12, each number bringing her closer to salvation or disaster. The backpack strapped to her shoulders, stuffed with her entire life's most important possessions, thumped against her spine with each hurried step. Inside that bag was her carefully folded resume, printed on the expensive paper she'd splurged on at Kinko's, her portfolio of work from her various caregiver positions, a change of clothes for the interview, and exactly $47.32 in cash, literally all the money she had left in the world after buying the plane ticket. The weight of the bag didn't matter. The burning in her lungs from running didn't matter. The curious stares from other travelers didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching gate C16 before those doors closed forever and her dreams disappeared into the Seattle sky. This wasn't just any flight. This was the flight, the one she had saved for 11 grueling months to afford, working double shifts at Murphy's Diner on East 9th Street and pulling overnight hours caring for elderly patients through the city's in-home care program. Every penny had been scraped together with the precision of an archaeologist, every sacrificed meal, every declined invitation from the few friends she could barely afford to keep, every walk to work in the rain instead of taking the bus. It all led to this moment. Gate C16, Flight 287, her future waiting 3,000 miles away in Seattle. Emma's life had been a masterclass in making do with less. At 29, she lived in a studio apartment in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood that was generous in calling itself cozy. The rent was $485 a month, which sounds reasonable until you factor in that her monthly income from her 2 part-time jobs rarely exceeded $200. The apartment had thin walls that let her hear every argument from the couple next door, a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains, and a kitchen so small she could touch both walls while standing in the middle. But it was hers, and that meant something. She'd grown up the eldest of 4 children, raised by a single mother named Maria Brooks who cleaned office buildings at night and taught her children that dignity wasn't about what you owned. It was about how you treated people when you had every reason not to be kind. Maria worked 3 jobs after Emma's father died in a construction accident when Emma was 12, and somehow still managed to be at every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered. Mija, her mother would say in her mix of English and Spanish that had been the soundtrack of Emma's childhood, La bondad no cuesta nada, pero vale todo. Kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Emma had internalized that lesson so deeply it had become part of her DNA. She gave all she could, and today she was racing toward what she thought was her chance to give even more, in a bigger way, with better resources and a real salary that might finally let her help her mother retire from those night shifts that were destroying her back. The job interview tomorrow morning at Hope Harbor Foundation could change everything. Program director, not assistant, not coordinator, but director of their Children's Disability Services Department. It wasn't just a job, it was her calling crystallized into a career opportunity. The position would let her use her degree in social work, the one she'd earned going to classes part-time over 6 years while working full-time to support herself. The degree that had been gathering dust while she struggled to pay rent and keep food on the table. Emma had discovered Hope Harbor Foundation through one of her elderly clients, Mrs. Patterson, whose grandson had cerebral palsy. "They're angels," Mrs. Patterson had said, tears in her eyes as she showed Emma pictures of her grandson at one of their summer camps. "They see the child, not the disability. They give families hope when the world tells them to give up." When Emma saw the job posting online, she'd stared at her laptop screen for 20 minutes, reading and rereading the job description. It was as if someone had looked into her heart and written down everything she'd ever wanted to do with her life. Develop and oversee programs supporting children with disabilities and their families. Create community outreach initiatives. Coordinate with schools, healthcare providers, and social services. Lead a team of dedicated professionals in changing lives through compassionate care and innovative programming. The salary range was $55,000 to $65,000 annually, more money than Emma had ever imagined making. It was enough to move her mother out of that cramped apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots sometimes punctuated the night. It was enough to help her brother Marcus finish his engineering degree without drowning in student loans. It was enough to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck and start building something that looked like a real life. But first, she had to catch this plane. C-13, C-14, C-15. She panted, her lungs burning from the sprint. Almost there. Just a few more steps and, "Help, please, someone." The voice was barely a whisper, trembling and desperate, but it cut through the airport chaos like a fire alarm in a library. Emma's feet, which had been carrying her toward her future with unwavering determination, suddenly felt like they were encased in concrete. Her momentum carried her 2 more steps before her brain processed what she'd heard, and then she stopped so abruptly that a businessman behind her nearly crashed into her back. She turned, her chest heaving from the sprint, and saw him. Slumped in one of those uncomfortable plastic airport seats that seemed designed to prevent people from getting too comfortable was an elderly man who looked like he was being slowly crushed by an invisible weight. His coat was rumpled gray wool, expensive once but now bearing the creases and wear patterns that spoke of many years and many journeys. His silver hair, which had probably been carefully combed that morning, was now disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it in distress. But it was his face that stopped Emma's heart. Pale as parchment, with deep lines carved by decades of living, and eyes, cloudy blue like a winter sky, that held a terror so raw and primal that it transcended age, status, and circumstance. This was the look of someone staring into the abyss and finding it staring back. A wooden cane lay abandoned on the floor beside him like a fallen soldier, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. His gnarled hands that told stories of a lifetime of work, of handshakes and embraces, of building and creating, clutched at his chest as if he could somehow hold his heart together through sheer will. Emma's trained eye, honed by years of caring for elderly patients, immediately cataloged the symptoms. The grayish pallor of his skin, the cold sweat beading on his forehead despite the airport's air conditioning, the way his breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Heart attack, possibly, or at minimum, severe angina. She'd seen it before, knew the signs, understood the urgency. The gate was just ahead, maybe 40 feet away. She could see the last few passengers disappearing down the jetway, their rolling luggage trailing behind them like faithful dogs. The flight attendant at the podium was already reaching for her microphone to make the final call, the one that would seal the door and send Emma's carefully constructed future taxiing down the runway without her. Her boarding pass grew damp in her sweaty palm. Zone 3, Seat 23F. Middle seat, cramped and uncomfortable, but it might as well have been first class for what it represented. Freedom, opportunity, a chance to finally use her education and her passion for something meaningful. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured over the past 11 months, the humiliation of asking her mother for $20 for groceries when her own cupboards were bare, the exhaustion of working until 3 a.m. at the diner and then getting up at 6 for her caregiver shift, the loneliness of having no social life because she literally couldn't afford one. All of it came down to the single moment. The choice was stark in its simplicity. Walk to the gate, board the plane, change her life, or help a stranger and watch her dreams disappear into the cloudy Ohio sky. Emma thought about her mother, Maria, who was probably at home right now, having just finished her shift cleaning the offices downtown. Maria, who had sacrificed everything for her children, who still worked those brutal night shifts even though her back ached constantly and her feet swelled so badly she could barely walk by morning. Maria, who had been so proud when Emma told her about the interview that she'd cried right there in the grocery store where they'd run into each other. "Mia, this is it," Maria had said, gripping Emma's hands with fingers still rough from industrial cleaning chemicals. "This is your chance to do what you were meant to do." Emma thought about her siblings. Marcus, 26, brilliant and driven, finishing his master's degree in mechanical engineering while working at an automotive parts factory to pay for school. He was so close to graduating, so close to landing one of those good-paying engineering jobs that would let him buy a house and start a family. But the student loans were crushing him, and Emma knew he sometimes went hungry so he could send their mother $50 for groceries. Sarah, 24, had just gotten engaged to David, a junior associate at a law firm who seemed kind and stable and completely devoted to her. But Sarah worked retail at the mall, barely making enough to afford her share of rent in the apartment she shared with 2 roommates. The wedding they were planning would be small and simple, not because they wanted it that way, but because it was all they could afford. And Tommy, the baby at 17, who was already 6'4" and had colleges scouting him for basketball. Tommy, who was so smart it sometimes took Emma's breath away, who could have gone to any school in the country if they could afford it. But scholarship or not, college was expensive, and Emma knew her mother lay awake nights worrying about how they'd manage the costs that scholarships didn't cover. This job, this interview, wasn't just about Emma's future. It was about her family's future. It was about finally being able to help, to give back, to lift some of the burden from her mother's shoulders and maybe help her siblings reach their own dreams. The old man wheezed again, a rattling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, and Emma felt something fundamental shift inside her. It was as if a switch had been flipped, transforming her from someone racing toward personal salvation into someone who couldn't walk away from another person's suffering. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. La bondad no cuesta nada, pero vale todo. But sometimes, Emma realized as she took a step toward the old man, kindness costs everything. She ran back. Emma Brooks had never considered herself a hero, and if someone had suggested she was one as she dropped to her knees beside the elderly stranger, she would have laughed, if she'd had breath for laughing. Heroes were people you read about in newspapers or saw in movies, people who ran into burning buildings or stopped speeding trains or performed surgery in war zones. Heroes were extraordinary people doing extraordinary things in extraordinary circumstances. She was just Emma. Emma, who could balance 6 plates on one arm and remember that Mr. Henderson liked his coffee black with exactly 2 sugars, never more, never less. Emma, who stayed late every Tuesday evening to read poetry to Mrs. Patterson, because the old woman's eyesight was failing, and books had been her greatest joy for 83 years. Emma, who helped Mr. Garcia with his physical therapy exercises, even though it wasn't part of her job description, because she'd seen the way his face lit up when he managed to take 5 steps without his walker. She was Emma, the oldest of 4 kids, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night and somehow still managed to pack lunches with little notes of encouragement, who never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference despite working 3 jobs, who taught her children that kindness wasn't a luxury you could afford only when you were comfortable. It was a necessity, as Essen. Teal is breathing. Emma had always given all she could. Today she was about to give up what felt like everything. Her knees hit the cold airport floor with a soft thud that she felt more than heard. Her jeans, the good pair she'd bought specifically for the trip, dark wash, no holes, professional looking, absorbed the chill from the tile. Her hands, steadied by years of experience caring for people who reminded her of her own grandfather, immediately went to work. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice took on the calm, soothing tone she'd perfected over countless bedside vigils, countless emergency situations, countless moments when her presence was the difference between panic and peace. "My name is Emma, and I'm here to help you. Can you tell me where it hurts?" His eyes, a faded blue like worn denim, like the sky just before dawn, focused on her face with the desperate gratitude of someone who had been drowning and suddenly felt solid ground beneath their feet. She could see intelligence in those eyes, and pain, and something else that reminded her achingly of her grandfather, who had died when she was 16 and left a hole in her heart that never quite healed. My chest," he gasped, each word clearly a struggle. His accent was educated, refined. East Coast money, Emma's mind noted automatically. "Can't breathe right. Feels like elephant sitting on me." Emma's trained eye noted all the classic symptoms. The shortness of breath that made him speak in fragments, the chest pain he kept trying to massage away with his gnarled fingers, the cold sweat that had nothing to do with the airport's aggressive air conditioning, the grayish pallor that spoke of a cardiovascular system in distress. Heart attack possibly, or at minimum severe angina. She'd seen it twice before in her work, Once with Mr. Rodriguez, who'd had a mild heart attack while she was helping him with his medication, and once with Mrs. Chen, who'd gone into cardiac arrest while Emma was reading to her. Both times, Emma's quick thinking and calm response had made the difference between life and death. "Okay, just try to stay calm for me," she said, her fingers finding the pulse point on his wrist. Rapid but steady. Not great, but not immediately life-threatening. "I'm going to help you, but I need you to focus on breathing slowly and deeply if you can. In through your nose, out through your mouth." With her free hand, she reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone, simultaneously calling out to the bustling crowd around them. "I need help over here. Medical emergency. Is there a doctor or nurse in the area?" The airport crowd, which had been flowing around them like water around a stone, suddenly focused with startling clarity. A security guard with kind eyes and graying temples appeared first, his radio already in his hand. "What's the situation, miss?" "Elderly male, chest pain, shortness of breath, diaphoresis." Emma rattled off the symptoms with the precision of someone who'd worked in healthcare long enough to know that clear communication could save lives. "Possible cardiac event. We need paramedics now." The security guard, his name tag read Robert Martinez, was already speaking into his radio, his voice calm and professional. Behind him, a gate agent appeared, her own phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with emergency services. But Emma's attention remained focused on the old man, whose grip on her other hand had tightened to the point where she could feel his pulse through his fingertips. His breathing was becoming more labored, and she could see panic starting to creep back into his eyes. "Hey, look at me," she said softly, leaning closer so he could hear her over the growing commotion. "What's your name?" "Arthur," he whispered. "Arthur Harrington." "Arthur, I'm Emma Brooks, and I want you to know that you're going to be okay. The paramedics are on their way, and they're going to take excellent care of you. But right now, I need you to focus on my voice and breathe with me, okay?" She began breathing in an exaggerated rhythm. In for 4 counts, hold for 2, out for 6, and slowly, Arthur began to mirror her pattern. She'd learned this technique during her certification training, but she'd perfected it through necessity, working with elderly patients who suffered from anxiety and panic attacks. "That's perfect, Arthur. You're doing great. Can you tell me if you're taking any medications for your heart?" "Metoprolol," he managed between breaths. "And atorvastatin, aspirin." Emma nodded, filing away the information to relay to the paramedics. "Beta blocker, statin, blood thinner. Standard protocol for someone with a history of cardiac issues. Any allergies to medications?" "Penicillin," he said, and Emma was encouraged to hear that his voice was getting slightly stronger. In the background, she became aware of sounds that should have filled her with joy, but instead felt like nails on a chalkboard. "Flight 287 to Seattle. This is your final boarding call. Final boarding call. The aircraft door will be closing in 2 minutes." Then, piercing through the terminal noise like a sword through silk, "Emma Brooks, please report to gate C16 immediately." "Emma Brooks to gate C16. This is your final boarding call." Arthur's eyes, which had been focused on her face with the concentration of someone using her presence as an anchor, suddenly filled with something that looked like horror. "Miss," he whispered, his voice urgent despite his condition. That's your flight, isn't it? You should go. I'll be fine." Emma looked into his eyes and saw her grandfather again. Pop, who had worked construction for 40 years and never missed a day, who had taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot behind their apartment building and showed her how to make pancakes from scratch on Sunday mornings. Pop, who had been driving to one of her soccer games when the drunk driver ran the red light and ended not just his life, but her childhood. She thought about Pop's funeral, how the church had been packed with people, co-workers, neighbors, strangers whose lives he'd touched in small ways. The construction foreman had spoken about how Pop always stayed late to help the new guys learn the ropes. Mrs. Garcia from next door had talked about how he'd fixed her steps every winter without being asked. Emma's soccer coach had mentioned how Pop had quietly paid for uniforms for kids whose families couldn't afford them. "There will be other flights," Emma lied, knowing her bank account was now empty, knowing there was no money for another ticket, knowing this opportunity might never come again. The old man, Arthur, stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if he was seeing something in her that she didn't even see in herself. The paramedics arrived with professional efficiency, their equipment clattering as they quickly assessed the situation. Emma smoothly transitioned from primary caregiver to assistant, providing them with Arthur's vital signs, his medical history, and her observations about the progression of his symptoms. "You did good work here," the lead paramedic, a woman about Emma's age with competent hands and kind eyes, said as they prepared to transport Arthur to the hospital. "Are you medical?" "Certified caregiver," Emma replied. "I work with elderly patients." "Well, you probably saved his life. Quick response, good instincts. Ever think about becoming a paramedic?" Emma almost laughed. She'd thought about a lot of things: nursing school, physician assistant programs, even medical school. But they all required time and money she didn't have. "Maybe someday," she said instead. As the paramedics loaded Arthur onto the stretcher, he reached out and grabbed Emma's hand with surprising strength. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice clearer now that oxygen was flowing through the mask they'd placed over his nose and mouth. "I need you to know what you did today. I won't forget it." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "Just focus on getting better, Arthur. That's all that matters." She watched the ambulance disappear into the Seattle traffic, its red and blue lights flashing against the gray morning sky. Only then did she allow herself to look at the departure board. Flight 287 to Seattle. Departed. Her flight was gone. Her interview was tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Even if she could somehow afford another ticket, which she couldn't, there weren't any more direct flights that would get her there in time. The next available flight was Wednesday afternoon, 2 days too late. Emma sat alone at gate C-16, the waiting area that had been bustling with activity just 2 hours ago, now eerily quiet. Her boarding pass lay crumpled in her hand like a broken promise, the letters and numbers that had once represented hope, now meaningless marks on expensive paper. The tears came slowly at first, then in a flood that she couldn't stop. Not tears of regret. She knew in her heart that she had done the right thing, but tears of pure, bone-deep exhaustion. Tears for the 11 months of sacrifice that had led to this moment. Tears for the interview she would never have, the job she would never get, the life she would never live. It had taken her 12 months of working double shifts, of choosing ramen over real meals, of walking to work in the rain and snow instead of taking the bus, to save the $847 for that plane ticket. 12 months of saying no to everything: movies with friends, dinners out, new clothes, small luxuries that might have made her life a little brighter. 12 months of living like a monk, focused solely on this one goal. The job in Seattle, program director at Hope Harbor Foundation, wasn't just a career opportunity. It was her dream job, the culmination of years of education and experience, the chance to finally use her social work degree for something meaningful. It was the opportunity to work with children with disabilities, to develop programs that could change lives, to be part of something bigger than herself. More than that, it was her chance to finally help her family the way they had helped her. The salary would have allowed her to send her mother money every month, to help Marcus finish school without drowning in debt, to contribute to Sarah's wedding fund, to make sure Tommy had everything he needed for college. Now, all of that was gone. Emma pulled out her phone with shaking hands and stared at the contact information for Sarah Martinez, the hiring manager who had been so enthusiastic during their phone interview the week before. Sarah had sounded genuinely excited about Emma's background, her experience, her passion for the work. "We've been looking for someone exactly like you," Sarah had said. "Someone with both the technical qualifications and the heart for this work. I have a really good feeling about this." Emma typed slowly, each word feeling like a small death. "Ms. Martinez, I'm so sorry, but I had a family emergency and missed my flight to Seattle. I won't be able to make tomorrow's interview. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. Thank you for the opportunity and for considering me for the position. Sincerely, Emma Brooks." She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the send button. Once she pressed it, that would be it. Game over. Back to Cleveland, back to her studio apartment with the clanging radiator, back to serving coffee and scrambled eggs to truckers and cleaning up after people who barely saw her as human. She pressed send and immediately turned off her phone. She couldn't bear to see the response, couldn't handle the disappointment and confusion that would inevitably follow. A janitor pushing a large cart full of cleaning supplies noticed her sitting there, shoulders slumped in defeat, tears streaming down her face. He was a man in his 60s with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of honest work. His uniform was clean and pressed, and he wore it with the dignity of someone who took pride in his job, no matter what others might think of it. "You okay, miss?" he asked, pausing in his methodical sweeping. His voice carried a slight accent, Mexican maybe, or Central American. Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be crying in public. "Yeah, just missed my flight." He nodded slowly, leaning on his broom handle. "Sometimes life has different plans for us than we have for ourselves," he said quietly. "Doesn't make it easier, but sometimes there's a reason. My wife, she always says, Dios cierra una puerta, pero abre una ventana. God closes a door, but opens a window." Emma managed a weak smile. "I hope your wife is right." "She usually is," he said with a small chuckle. "Been married 42 years, and she's been right about most everything. You seem like a good person, miss. Good things happen to good people, even when it doesn't feel like it." He resumed his sweeping, leaving Emma alone with his words and her thoughts. Hours crawled by like wounded animals, each minute stretching into an eternity of regret and uncertainty. Emma wandered through Cleveland Hopkins International Airport in a daze, a ghost haunting the terminals where other people were living their lives, catching flights, reuniting with loved ones, beginning adventures. She found herself at the large windows overlooking the tarmac, watching planes of all sizes taxi back and forth like enormous metal insects. United, Delta, American, Southwest, each airline carrying passengers toward their destinies, while she remained grounded, literally and figuratively. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and watched a Boeing 737 accelerate down the runway, its wheels leaving the ground with what looked like effortless grace. That could have been her flight, should have been her flight. Emma thought about calling her mother, but what would she say? That she had blown her one chance at a real career to help a stranger. Maria would understand, might even be proud. But Emma couldn't bear the worry she would hear in her voice. Her mother had been so excited about the interview, so hopeful that this would be Emma's big break. "Finally, mija, your time has come," Maria had said when Emma told her about the job opportunity. "You've been taking care of everyone else for so long. It's time for someone to take care of you." But now there would be no one taking care of Emma. She would go back to Cleveland, back to her 2 part-time jobs, back to scraping by month after month with no clear path forward. She thought about her siblings. Marcus, who had been planning to ask Emma for help with his final semester tuition. He hadn't said anything directly, but Emma had seen the worry in his eyes, the way he'd been eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. With her new salary, she could have helped him graduate debt-free. Sarah, who had been dreaming of a real wedding, not just a courthouse ceremony. Emma had secretly been planning to offer to pay for Sarah's dress, maybe even help with the reception. It would have been her gift to the sister who had always been there for her. And Tommy, brilliant Tommy, who was already being recruited by colleges but would need help with expenses that scholarships didn't cover. Emma had been fantasizing about setting up a college fund for him, making sure he could go anywhere he wanted without worrying about money. All of those dreams were gone now, evaporated like morning mist. Emma wandered past shops selling overpriced airport food and souvenirs that no one really needed. She passed business travelers typing urgently on laptops, families corralling small children, elderly couples holding hands as they navigated the terminal together. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, someone to see, something important waiting for them. She found herself in front of a coffee shop near Gate A7, staring at the menu without really seeing it. $7 for a latte seemed obscene when she had less than $50 to her name. But she needed something, some small comfort to get her through the next few hours while she figured out what to do next. As she stood there calculating whether she could afford even a small coffee, the woman behind the counter, a middle-aged Latina with kind eyes and graying temples, looked up from the espresso machine she was cleaning. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying the musical accent of someone for whom English was a second language. "Are you Miss Emma Brooks?" Emma turned, surprised and confused. She had never seen this woman before in her life. The barista was wearing a standard airport coffee shop uniform, black polo shirt, black apron, name tag that read Carmen, and there was nothing about her that Emma recognized. "Yes," Emma said cautiously. "Do I know you?" Carmen smiled, and there was something warm and mysterious in her expression. "You've been requested to come to Gate 4. There's someone waiting for you." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm sorry, what? Who's waiting for me? How do you know my name?" "I was just asked to give you the message," Carmen said, her smile growing wider. Gate 4. The person is waiting in the executive lounge. Emma's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had something happened to Arthur? Were the authorities looking for her for some reason? Had someone found her wallet? Did she owe money to someone she'd forgotten about? Who asked you to give me this message? Emma pressed. Carmen just shook her head, still smiling. Gate 4, miss, that's all I can tell you. Still bewildered and increasingly wary, Emma walked slowly through the terminal toward Gate 4, dragging her worn duffel bag behind her. The bag, which had seemed so light when she'd packed it that morning full of hope and anticipation, now felt like it was filled with stones. Her mind ran through scenarios as she walked. Maybe it was a security issue. Perhaps they needed to interview her about what had happened with Arthur. Maybe it was a legal matter. Could she somehow be liable for providing medical assistance without being a licensed professional? She'd heard horror stories about Good Samaritans being sued, though she'd never believed they were true. Or maybe, and this thought made her stomach clench, maybe Arthur had taken a turn for the worse. Maybe his family wanted to thank her, or blame her, or ask her questions about his condition when she'd found him. When she arrived at Gate 4, 2 men in expensive-looking navy suits were waiting for her. They had the kind of polished appearance that spoke of corner offices and 6-figure salaries, but their smiles seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. One was tall and lean with silver-streaked hair, the other shorter and rounder with kind eyes behind rimless glasses. "Miss Brooks?" the taller one asked, stepping forward with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Mr. Harrington would like to meet with you." "Mr. Harrington?" Emma repeated, the name ringing a bell but not quite clicking into place in her exhausted, emotionally overwrought mind. They didn't elaborate, just gestured toward a nearby entrance she had walked past hundreds of times but never really noticed. The doorway was marked with discreet gold lettering on frosted glass. SkyLegend Airlines, Executive Lounge, members and guests only. Emma had seen these executive lounges in airports before, usually while hurrying past to her own gate in the general terminal. She'd always wondered what was behind those unmarked doors, imagining luxury and comfort that existed in a different universe from the hard plastic seats and overpriced food courts where regular travelers like herself waited for their flights. "I think there's been some mistake," Emma said, her voice uncertain. "I'm not a member of anything, and I certainly don't have anyone waiting for me in an executive lounge." The shorter man smiled kindly. "No mistake, Miss Brooks. Mr. Harrington specifically requested to see you." They held the door open, and Emma found herself walking into a world she had never imagined existed within an airport. If the main terminal was a bustling marketplace, this was a gentleman's club from another era. The atmosphere was hushed and refined, a world away from the chaos outside. The lights were dimmed to a comfortable amber glow that was easy on the eyes after the harsh fluorescence of the terminal. The furniture was all plush leather and polished wood, not the cheap imitations she was used to, but genuine materials that had been crafted by people who understood quality. Deep burgundy leather chairs that looked like they could envelop you in comfort, mahogany tables with surfaces so highly polished they reflected the warm lighting like mirrors. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, not the tinny, barely audible background noise of the main terminal, but rich, full sound that filled the space without overwhelming it. Emma recognized the piece as something by Mozart, though she couldn't name the specific composition. The carpet was so thick it seemed to absorb both sound and stress, creating an oasis of calm in the chaos of air travel. The walls were decorated with what looked like original artwork, not prints or reproductions, but actual paintings in expensive frames. Aviation-themed, Emma noticed. Vintage photographs of early aircraft, paintings of clouds and sky, elegant line drawings of jets in flight. Along one wall was a buffet that made Emma's mouth water. Fresh fruit arranged in crystal bowls, pastries that looked like they'd come from a high-end bakery, a coffee service with multiple options and real china cups. Everything was presented with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of people who understood that small touches could make a big difference in someone's day. But Emma barely had time to take in the luxury surrounding her before her attention was captured by the man seated in a large leather chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the runway. It was Arthur, but he looked nothing like the frail, desperate figure she had helped just hours earlier. The rumpled gray coat was gone, replaced by a crisp navy suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 3 months. The disheveled hair was now neatly combed, silver and distinguished, His posture was straight and commanding, and he was sipping tea from what appeared to be actual china rather than a paper cup. He looked like what he was, Emma realized with a shock of recognition. A man accustomed to power, to being listened to getting what he wanted. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said, setting down his teacup with the careful precision of someone who had been raised with proper manners. His voice was stronger now, clear and commanding, though Emma could still hear traces of the breathlessness that had frightened her so much earlier. "Please sit." Emma remained standing, too stunned to move. You're okay." "I am, thanks to you." He gestured to the chair across from him, leather so supple it looked like butter, probably worth more than her monthly rent. "The doctors at University Hospital said I had what they called an episode of unstable angina. Serious, but not immediately life-threatening. However, they also said that without your quick response, it could have escalated into something much worse." Emma finally sat, feeling overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her and the strangeness of the situation. The chair was even more comfortable than it looked, embracing her tired body like a gentle hug. "I missed my flight," she said, not sure why she was offering this information, but feeling like she needed to fill the silence. Arthur's expression became grave, and he leaned forward slightly. "I know everything. I asked around." His eyes, which had been cloudy with panic just hours earlier, were now sharp and assessing, missing nothing. "The gate agents told me what you did. How you stayed with me instead of boarding your flight. How you missed what they said was clearly an important trip." Emma was still baffled. The whole situation felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than her ordinary life. She kept waiting to wake up, to find herself back in her cramped studio apartment with the clanging radiator, late for her shift at the diner. "Who are you?" Arthur leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he leaned forward and offered his hand with old-fashioned courtesy. "Arthur Winston Harrington III, founder and chairman of Sky Legend Airlines." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Sky Legend Airlines, one of the major carriers, with routes all over the country. The distinctive blue and silver planes she'd seen taking off from Cleveland Hopkins countless times. The airline whose flight she had just missed. You own the airline?" He chuckled, a sound like distant thunder rumbling across a summer sky. "Technically, my children run most of it now. My daughter Catherine is the CEO. Brilliant woman, much better at the day-to-day operations than I ever was. My son Michael handles operations and logistics, but I still visit airports on my own from time to time. Old habits die hard, I suppose." Arthur stood and walked to the window, his movements still slightly careful but much steadier than they had been hours earlier. "I like watching people, seeing how they interact when they think no one important is looking. You see the best and worst of humanity in airports. People under stress, running late, saying goodbye, saying hello. Fear, joy, anger, love. It's all here. Every human emotion concentrated into one space." He turned back to Emma, his gaze intense. "And today, I saw something rare." Emma was speechless, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. This was Arthur Harrington, as in Harrington Airlines before it was renamed Sky Legend. She'd read about him in business magazines, seen him mentioned in articles about airline deregulation and customer service innovation. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions. And she had found him having a heart attack on an airport floor. "You gave up everything to help a complete stranger," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent decades making judgments about people's character. Most people would have walked past. Oh, they might have felt bad about it later, might have justified it to themselves. "Someone else will help. I had somewhere important to be. It's not my responsibility. I'm not qualified. But you didn't hesitate. You saw someone in need and you acted." Emma lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should have done." Arthur's smile was both sad and knowing. "That's exactly the problem, my dear. Not everyone does. In fact, very few people do. Do you know how many people walked past me before you stopped? Dozens. Hundreds, maybe. I was sitting there for at least 10 minutes before you came along, and person after person just kept walking." He returned to his chair, moving with the careful dignity of someone who had recently been reminded of his own mortality. "But you reminded me why I built this company in the first place." Emma looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment. staring out the window at the planes coming and going. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decades of memory. I started Sky Legend Airlines 47 years ago with a single plane, a beat-up DC-3 that I bought from a cargo company that was going out of business. I was 26 years old, had no business experience, and every bank in Cleveland had turned me down for a loan. I was weeks away from losing everything when a man named Robert Chen took a chance on me. Arthur's eyes took on a distant look, as if he were seeing not the busy airport outside, but scenes from decades past. Robert owned a small import business in Chinatown. Had no reason to trust a kid from Ohio with big dreams and no collateral, but he saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. He gave me a loan, not from a bank, but from his own pocket, $50,000, which might as well have been $50 million to me at the time. What happened to him? Emma asked, though she suspected she knew from Arthur's tone. He died 10 years ago. Cancer. Arthur's smile was both sad and beautiful. But before he passed, I was able to pay him back. Not just the money, but the kindness. I helped his daughter through medical school, set up his grandson with an internship that led to a great job at Boeing, made sure his wife never wanted for anything. It wasn't enough, of course. It's never enough, but it was what I could do. He looked at Emma with those sharp, knowing eyes. The thing about kindness, Miss Brooks, is that it's not a transaction. You don't do it expecting something in return. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the universe has a way of completing the circle. Today, you completed a circle for me. You reminded me why I do this work, why I built this company, and now I get to complete a circle for you. Arthur pulled out a sleek phone and dialed a number. Emma could only catch fragments of the conversation, but what she heard made her heart race. Sarah, it's Arthur Harrington. Yes, I'm fine, thanks. Listen, I need you to do something for me. There's a young woman named Emma Brooks who was supposed to have an interview with Hope Harbor Foundation tomorrow. Yes, that's right. I want you to reschedule the interview and fly the entire board of directors out to meet her personally. No, I'm not kidding. Trust me on this one, Sarah. He hung up and turned back to Emma, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Miss Brooks, if your interview goes well, and I have every confidence it will, you'll have the job. We'll take care of all travel accommodations, hotel, meals, everything. And as for salary negotiations, he smiled mysteriously. Let's just say you won't need to worry about money again for quite some time. Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. Why? Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because the world needs more people like you, he said simply. Because you helped an old man who everyone else ignored. Because when faced with a choice between your own advancement and someone else's well-being, you chose compassion without hesitation. And because, he paused, looking out the window at the planes coming and going. Because 47 years ago, someone took a chance on me. A stranger who saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Arthur leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. But there's more to this than just the job at Hope Harbor, Emma. May I call you Emma? She nodded, still too stunned to speak. I've been thinking about something for months now. A new initiative for Sky Legend. We're incredibly successful financially, but I've always believed that success without purpose is just another form of failure. I want to create a charitable wing of the airline, focused on humanitarian efforts, supporting elderly passengers who need extra assistance, providing free flights for low-income families dealing with medical emergencies, partnering with organizations that help caregivers like yourself. Emma's social worker training kicked in, and despite her shock, she found herself leaning forward with interest. That sounds amazing. There's such a need for those kinds of services. Exactly. Arthur's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. And I need someone to head up this initiative, someone with experience in social work, someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who has proven that they put people before personal gain. Someone like you. Emma felt dizzy. Mr. Harrington, I don't understand. This is all happening so fast. A few hours ago, I was serving coffee at a diner in Cleveland, and now you're offering me some kind of executive position at a major airline? Arthur chuckled. I know it seems overwhelming. But Emma, I've been in business for almost 50 years. I've hired thousands of people, from entry-level employees to vice presidents. And I've learned that technical skills can be taught, experience can be gained, but character, true character, is something you either have or you don't. You have it. He stood and walked to a small desk in the corner of the lounge, returning with a thick folder. This is a preliminary proposal for what we're calling the Sky Legend Cares Foundation. I've been working on it with my team for months, but we've been struggling to find the right person to lead it. Take a look. Emma opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were detailed plans for programs that seemed to address every gap in services she'd ever noticed in her work. Assistance programs for elderly travelers, medical transport services for families who couldn't afford commercial flights, partnerships with children's hospitals and disability organizations, scholarships for caregivers pursuing additional education. "This is incredible," she whispered, flipping through page after page of comprehensive programming. "This could help so many people." "That's the idea," Arthur said, "and the foundation would have an annual budget of $5 million to start, with plans to expand based on results. The director position would come with a salary of $120,000 annually, plus benefits, plus travel expenses, plus a housing allowance if you decide to relocate." Emma's head snapped up. $120,000? She'd never imagined making that much money. It was more than double what the Hope Harbor position had offered, plus performance bonuses based on program outcomes, Arthur added casually. "And of course, unlimited travel benefits for you and your immediate family on any Sky Legend flight." Emma set the folder down carefully as if it might explode. "Mr. Harrington, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why me? I mean, really, why me? There must be hundreds of people more qualified, with more experience, with actual nonprofit management backgrounds." Arthur sat back down, his expression becoming thoughtful. "Do you know what the hardest part of running a large company is, Emma?" She shook her head. "It's not the finances, though those are complex. It's not the logistics, though coordinating thousands of flights daily is challenging. It's not even the competition, though that's fierce. The hardest part is maintaining the soul of the organization as it grows, making sure that success doesn't corrupt your original mission." He gestured around the luxurious lounge. "It's easy to lose sight of why you started when you're surrounded by all this, when you're insulated from the real world by wealth and privilege. I've seen it happen to other companies, other leaders. They forget that business is ultimately about serving people, not just making profits." Arthur's voice took on an intensity that reminded Emma of her favorite professors in social work school. "Today you reminded me of something I never want to forget. You showed me that there are still people who will sacrifice everything to help a stranger. People who understand that our connections to each other are what make life meaningful. That's not something you can teach in business school or put on a resume. That's something you either have in your bones or you don't." Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but these were different tears from the ones she'd shed earlier. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This is so much bigger than anything I've ever done. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not good enough?" Arthur's smile was gentle and understanding. "Do you know what I was scared of when Robert Chen offered me that loan? Everything. I was terrified I'd lose his money, that I'd fail, that I'd prove everyone who had doubted me right. But he told me something I've never forgotten. Fear is not the enemy of courage. It's the proof that what you're doing matters." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Emma, I'm not offering you this opportunity because I think you'll never make mistakes. I'm offering it because I believe you'll make them for the right reasons, and you'll learn from them, and you'll never lose sight of why we're doing this work in the first place." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the folder that contained plans that could change thousands of lives, plans that could change her life. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were having your episode earlier, were you really in as much danger as it seemed? Or was this all some kind of test?" Arthur's laugh was genuine and hearty. "My dear, I can assure you that what happened earlier was absolutely real. I have the hospital records and the cardiologist's report to prove it. This wasn't some elaborate ruse to find an employee, though I have to admit, if I had thought of it, it would have been brilliant." His expression became more serious. "What happened today was real, Emma. Your choice was real, and the consequences could have been real for both of us. You didn't know who I was when you stopped to help me. For all you knew, I was just another elderly person in distress. You made your choice based on your values, not on what you might get out of it." Emma nodded, feeling some of her skepticism ease. "And the job at Hope Harbor Foundation is still yours if you want it. My assistant has rescheduled your interview for next week, and I can guarantee you'll be seriously considered. But I'm hoping you'll consider this opportunity instead." Arthur pulled out a business card and handed it to her. It was elegant in its simplicity. Thick paper, embossed lettering, contact information for his direct line. I don't need an answer today. Take the weekend to think about it. Talk to your family, your friends, anyone whose opinion you value. And if you decide you're interested, call me Monday morning. Emma took the card with hands that were still trembling slightly. What happens if I say no? Then you say no, and there are no hard feelings. I'll still make sure your interview at Hope Harbor goes well, and I'll still be grateful for what you did today. This offer isn't conditional on you saying yes. It's a thank you that happens to also be a job opportunity. Arthur stood and extended his hand. My assistant will arrange for you to stay at the Cleveland Ritz-Carlton tonight. Sky Legend's expense, of course. Tomorrow there's a first-class seat waiting for you on whatever flight you'd like to take back to Seattle for your interview, or back home to Cleveland to think things over. Emma stood as well, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, the handshake of someone accustomed to making important deals. Mr. Harrington, I don't know what to say. Say that you'll consider it. That's all I ask. As Emma walked toward the door of the executive lounge, Arthur called after her. Emma? She turned back. Thank you. Not just for helping me today, but for reminding me why I got into this business in the first place. Win or lose on the job front, you've already given me something invaluable. Emma smiled, feeling for the first time in hours like she might actually be able to breathe normally again. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, for everything. Emma spent that night in the most luxurious hotel room she had ever seen, let alone stayed in. The Cleveland Ritz-Carlton was a world away from her studio apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Erie, marble bathroom fixtures that probably cost more than her car, and a bed so comfortable she felt like she was floating on a cloud. But despite the luxury, she barely slept. She kept thinking about Arthur's offer, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Director of Sky Legend Cares Foundation. $120,000 a year. $5 million budget. The chance to create programs that could help thousands of people. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. But it was also terrifying. Around 3 a.m., she finally gave up on sleep and called her mother. Emma? Mija, what's wrong? It's so late. Maria's voice was thick with sleep and concern. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need your advice. Emma told her mother everything, about missing the flight, about helping Arthur, about the incredible offer she'd received. She talked for over an hour, her words tumbling out in a rush of emotion and confusion. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mija, Maria finally said, her voice filled with wonder. Your father would be so proud. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. What should I do, Mom? What does your heart tell you? My heart tells me to say yes, but my brain tells me I'm not qualified, that I'll mess it up, that it's too good to be true. Maria was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to apply for that scholarship to Case Western? Emma smiled despite her tears. You made me apply even though I was sure I wouldn't get it. And what did I tell you? That the worst thing that could happen was they'd say no and I'd be exactly where I started. But if they said yes, your whole life could change. And what happened? I got the scholarship. Emma's voice was soft with memory, and it changed everything. This is the same thing, Mija. The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out, and you find another job. But if it does work out, I could help so many people. You could help so many people, Maria agreed. And isn't that what you've always wanted to do? After she hung up with her mother, Emma called Marcus. Em? Jesus, what time is it? Her brother's voice was groggy but immediately alert when he heard her voice. Marcus, I need to ask you something. If someone offered you a job that seemed too good to be true, would you take it? Depends. Are we talking about selling my soul to the devil or just regular too good to be true? Despite everything, Emma laughed. Regular too good to be true. She told him about the day's events, and when she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Em, he finally said, do you remember when I was 12 and wanted to build that robot for the science fair? The one that caught fire during the presentation? That's the one. Do you remember what you told me when I was afraid to enter it because I thought it wasn't good enough? Emma smiled. I told you that you'd never know how good you were if you didn't try. Exactly. And this is your robot, Em. This is your chance to find out how good you really are. She called Sarah next, who was characteristically direct. Emma, are you insane? Of course you should take it. Do you know how many people would kill for an opportunity like this? But what if I'm not qualified? What if you are? What if you're exactly what they need and you just don't know it yet? Finally, she called Tommy, even though it was now nearly 5 a.m. Em, are you okay? Tommy's voice was immediately concerned. Unlike her other siblings, he was a light sleeper and woke up easily. I'm okay, Tommy. I need some advice from my brilliant little brother. She told him the story, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Em, he said finally, remember when you taught me to ride a bike? Of course. I was so scared I was going to fall, and you told me that falling wasn't the worst thing that could happen. You said the worst thing that could happen was never trying to ride at all, because then I'd never know what it felt like to fly. Emma felt her heart clench with love for her baby brother. You remember that? I remember everything you ever taught me, and right now, I'm teaching it back to you. Don't be afraid of falling, Em. Be afraid of never trying to fly. As the sun rose over Lake Erie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Emma of the watercolor paintings her father used to make, she knew what she had to do. She picked up Arthur's business card and dialed his number. Arthur Harrington speaking. Mr. Harrington, this is Emma Brooks. Emma, good morning. I wasn't expecting to hear from you quite so early. I've been thinking about your offer all night. And? Emma took a deep breath. I'd like to accept, if the offer is still open. She could hear the smile in Arthur's voice. The offer is still open. And Emma? Yes? Welcome to Sky Legend Airlines. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary. 2 years later, Emma Brooks stood in the departure lounge at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, watching families board a Sky Legend flight to Cleveland. But these weren't ordinary passengers. They were families who had been selected for the Sky Legend Cares Foundation's Wings of Hope program, which provided free flights for low-income families dealing with medical emergencies. The little girl at the front of the line was 7 years old and wore a bright pink backpack that was almost as big as she was. Her name was Sophia Martinez, and she was flying to Cleveland Clinic with her mother for a consultation with a pediatric cardiologist. The flight that would normally cost the family over $800 was free, courtesy of the foundation Emma now directed. Miss Emma, Sophia called out when she spotted Emma near the gate. Look, I brought my teddy bear for the airplane. Emma knelt down to Sophia's level, admiring the well-loved stuffed animal. That's perfect, Sophia. He'll be a great flying companion. Sophia's mother, Carmen, approached with tears in her eyes. Miss Brooks, I don't know how to thank you. Without this program, Emma squeezed Carmen's hand. Just take care of that beautiful daughter of yours. That's all the thanks I need. As Emma watched the family board the plane, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The Sky Legend Cares Foundation had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. In just 2 years, they had provided free flights for over 2,000 families dealing with medical emergencies, created the Silver Wings program for elderly passengers who needed extra assistance during travel, established partnerships with 47 children's hospitals across the country, launched the Caregiver Scholarship Program, providing educational funding for healthcare workers pursuing advanced degrees, developed the Community Connection Initiative, offering discounted flights for volunteers traveling to disaster relief areas. The foundation's work had been featured in Time magazine, earned recognition from the American Red Cross, and inspired other airlines to launch similar programs. But for Emma, the real measure of success wasn't the awards or the media coverage. It was moments like this, watching families get the help they needed when they needed it most. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Arthur. Saw the news coverage of the Wings of Hope expansion. Proud of you. Coffee tomorrow? Emma smiled and typed back, of course, same place. Their weekly coffee meetings had become a tradition, a chance for Arthur to stay connected to the foundation's work, and for Emma to benefit from his decades of experience in both business and life. What had started as a professional mentorship had evolved into something more like a grandfather-granddaughter relationship. Emma's personal life had changed dramatically as well. The foundation work required her to travel frequently, and she had eventually decided to relocate to Seattle permanently. She now lived in a beautiful apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, with windows that looked out over Puget Sound and space for a real kitchen, where she could finally learn to cook something more elaborate than ramen. More importantly, she was able to help her family in ways she had never imagined. Marcus had graduated debt-free and was now working as a mechanical engineer for a renewable energy company. Sarah had had the wedding of her dreams, and Emma had been able to surprise her with a honeymoon trip to Italy. Tommy was in his sophomore year at Stanford on a full scholarship, with Emma covering his living expenses so he could focus on his studies instead of working multiple jobs. And Maria, Emma's mother, had finally been able to retire from those brutal night shifts. She now lived in a comfortable apartment near Emma's siblings, and for the first time in decades, she could rest. But perhaps the most significant change in Emma's life had been unexpected. 6 months earlier, at a conference on disability services, she had met Dr. James Chen, a pediatric physician who ran a clinic for children with special needs. James was the grandson of Robert Chen, the man who had given Arthur his first loan all those years ago. The connection had been pure coincidence, discovered during a casual conversation about their backgrounds. But as they talked more, Emma realized it was exactly the kind of beautiful symmetry that seemed to define her new life. James was kind, intelligent, passionate about his work, and shared Emma's belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and compassion. They had been dating for 4 months now, and Emma found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who understood that love, like kindness, was about what you gave rather than what you received. As she watched the last passengers board the flight to Cleveland, Emma's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "This is Emma Brooks." "Miss Brooks? This is Jennifer Walsh from CNN. I'm working on a story about corporate philanthropy and the impact of airline charitable programs. I was hoping I could interview you about Sky Legend Cares Foundation." Emma had done dozens of interviews over the past 2 years, and while she still felt awkward being in the spotlight, she had learned to use the media attention to raise awareness about the foundation's work. "I'd be happy to talk with you," Emma said. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Well, we're particularly interested in the origin story of the foundation. Our research suggests it all started with a chance encounter between you and Arthur Harrington at an airport. Is that correct?" Emma smiled, thinking about how many times she'd been asked to tell this story. "That's correct, though I'd hardly call it chance. Sometimes I think the universe has a way of putting people exactly where they need to be. Can you tell me about that day?" Emma found herself settling into the familiar rhythm of the story, but as she spoke, she realized something had changed in how she told it. In the early interviews, she had focused on the dramatic elements, the missed flight, the medical emergency, the surprising revelation of Arthur's identity. But now she found herself emphasizing different aspects. "The most important thing people need to understand," she said, "is that what happened to me could happen to anyone. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who was raised to believe that we're all connected, that taking care of each other isn't optional. It's necessary. But surely you must feel like your life changed dramatically because of that one decision to help a stranger." Emma considered this. "My circumstances changed dramatically, yes, but my life, who I am as a person, what I value, how I treat people, that hasn't changed at all. If anything, having these resources has just allowed me to be more of who I always was." After she hung up, Emma walked to the large windows overlooking the tarmac. She watched the plane carrying Sophia and her family taxi toward the runway, and thought about all the other planes taking off from airports around the world, carrying people toward reunions and farewells, toward new beginnings and hoped-for endings. Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from James. "How did the morning flights go?" "Perfect," she typed back. "Dinner tonight?" "Can't wait. I have something important to ask you." Emma felt her heart skip a beat, but it was different from the panic she'd felt that day in Cleveland. This was anticipation, excitement, the feeling of standing on the edge of another new beginning. As she walked back through the airport toward her office, Emma passed a coffee shop where a young woman in a Sky Legend uniform was helping an elderly passenger with his luggage. The woman, her name tag read Lisa, was being patient and kind, making sure the passenger felt taken care of rather than like a burden. Emma made a mental note to find out Lisa's full name and write a commendation for her personnel file. One of the things she'd learned in her role at the foundation was that kindness was contagious, but it needed to be recognized and rewarded to really spread. In her office, which had a view of the runway and walls covered with photos of families the foundation had helped, Emma found a package waiting on her desk. The return address was from Arthur's personal assistant. Inside was a framed photograph she'd never seen before. Arthur as a young man, standing next to a beat-up DC-3 aircraft, shaking hands with an elderly Asian man who could only be Robert Chen. Both men were smiling, and there was something in their expressions that spoke of mutual respect and shared hope. On the back of the frame, Arthur had written a note in his careful handwriting. Emma, this was taken the day Robert Chen gave me the loan that started Sky Legend Airlines. I thought you might like to see where this all began. The circle continues to grow, and I couldn't be more grateful to have you as part of it. Arthur. Emma set the photograph on her desk next to the other pictures that made her smile every day. Her family at Sarah's wedding, Tommy at his Stanford graduation, her mother in her new apartment, James at the clinic where he worked with children who reminded Emma why she had chosen this path in the first place. But there was one more photo that held a special place of honor. A picture taken at the gate that morning 2 years ago when she had first met Arthur. It showed her kneeling beside his wheelchair as the paramedics prepared to transport him to the hospital. Her face was filled with concern and compassion, and his was filled with gratitude and something that looked like recognition. At the time, neither of them could have imagined where that moment would lead. But now, looking back, Emma realized it wasn't really about the dramatic change in her circumstances. It was about the confirmation of something she had always known, but sometimes forgotten in the struggle to survive. That kindness was not just a luxury you could afford when life was going well. It was the most practical thing in the world, the foundation upon which everything meaningful was built. Her computer chimed with an email from a family in Denver whose daughter needed specialized treatment in Boston. They were applying for assistance through the Wings of Hope program, and as Emma read their story, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being able to help when help was desperately needed. She picked up her phone and called the program coordinator. Hi Janet, it's Emma. I'm looking at the Morrison family application. Yes, that's the one. Can we expedite this? They need to be in Boston by Thursday. Perfect. And let's make sure they're met at the airport by one of our volunteers. Thank you. As she hung up, Emma realized that her days were now filled with these kinds of calls. Calls that meant the difference between hope and despair for families facing impossible situations. It was exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing when she was serving coffee at Murphy's Diner, and wondering if her life would ever amount to anything meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on her. By missing the flight that was supposed to change her life, she had found the life she was meant to live all along. 5 years after that morning in Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, Emma Brooks stood at the podium in the main ballroom of the Seattle Fairmont Olympic Hotel, looking out at an audience of 500 people who had gathered for the Sky Legend Cares Foundation's annual gala. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. They now operated in 127 cities across North America, had helped over 15,000 families, and had inspired 6 other major airlines to launch similar programs. The annual budget had grown to $20 million, and Emma now oversaw a staff of 47 full-time employees and hundreds of volunteers. But tonight wasn't about the numbers, impressive as they were. Tonight was about the stories. 5 years ago, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the elegant ballroom. I was running through an airport, focused on one thing, catching a flight that I thought would change my life. I was so focused on my destination that I almost missed the most important moment of my life, the moment when a stranger needed help, and I had to choose between my plans and my principles. In the audience, she could see Arthur sitting at the head table, beaming with pride. Next to him sat James, who was now her husband of 18 months. And next to James sat a special guest, Sophia Martinez, now 12 years old and healthy, thanks to the surgery she'd received at Cleveland Clinic 5 years earlier. I used to think that kindness was something you could afford only when you had enough. Enough time, enough money, enough security, Emma continued. But I've learned something different. Kindness isn't something you can afford. It's something you can't afford not to give. She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. Donors, volunteers, families who had been helped by the foundation, and Sky Legend employees who had embraced the company's commitment to service. The beautiful thing about kindness is that it multiplies. Every act of compassion creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. The flight I missed that day led to this foundation, which has helped thousands of families. But those families have gone on to help others in their communities. The healthcare workers we've supported through scholarships are now caring for patients across the country. The children whose families we've helped are growing up with the understanding that strangers can be angels, and they're carrying that lesson forward into their own lives. Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. Tonight, I want to tell you about someone who embodies this principle of expanding kindness. Her name is Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, and she's here with us this evening. A spotlight found a woman in her early 30s sitting near the back of the room. Dr. Rodriguez stood and waved, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention. 7 years ago, Lisa was working as a coffee shop attendant at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. She was also taking night classes, trying to finish her pre-med requirements while supporting her younger siblings. One morning, she witnessed something that changed her perspective on what it means to serve others. She watched a young woman miss her flight to help a stranger in medical distress. Emma smiled as she saw recognition dawn on several faces in the audience. Lisa told me later that watching that moment made her realize that healing doesn't just happen in hospitals. It happens wherever one person chooses to care about another. That realization inspired her to accelerate her studies. She applied for one of our first caregiver scholarships, completed medical school, and is now a pediatric emergency physician at Seattle Children's Hospital. The applause was thunderous as Dr. Rodriguez waved again, tears visible on her cheeks even from a distance. But the story doesn't end there. Emma continued as the applause died down. Last month, Dr. Rodriguez was working in the emergency department when a 7-year-old boy came in after a severe asthma attack. The family had driven for 6 hours from a rural area because they couldn't afford the helicopter transport their local hospital recommended. While treating the child, Dr. Rodriguez learned that the family had sold their car to pay for the gas money for the drive, and they had no way to get home. Emma paused, letting the weight of the story settle over the audience. Dr. Rodriguez didn't just treat that little boy's asthma. She called our foundation's emergency hotline and arranged for the family to fly home free of charge. But more than that, she connected them with resources in their home community, helped them develop an asthma management plan, and even arranged for ongoing telemedicine consultations so the child wouldn't have to make that desperate drive again. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. That little boy is here tonight with his family. His name is Miguel Santos, and he wants to be a doctor when he grows up. Not because he was sick, but because he was helped by someone who showed him what healing really looks like. Another spotlight found a shy boy of about 8 sitting with his parents near the front of the room. Miguel stood up briefly, his face serious and determined beyond his years, before sitting back down. "This is what kindness looks like when it multiplies," Emma said, her voice filled with emotion. One moment of choosing compassion over convenience created a chain reaction that has literally saved lives and inspired a new generation of healers. She paused and looked directly at Arthur, who was wiping tears from his eyes. "But I want to be clear about something. The magic isn't in the grand gestures or the big donations or the formal programs, as important as those are. The magic is in the daily choice to see each other's humanity, to act with compassion even when it's inconvenient, to remember that we're all connected in ways we might never fully understand." Emma's voice took on a more personal tone. 3 months ago, my husband James and I were at the grocery store when we noticed an elderly woman ahead of us in line. Her card was being declined, and she was quietly asking the cashier to remove items from her order: milk, bread, medication, basic necessities. She could see people in the audience leaning forward, recognizing the universal nature of the story. James stepped forward and paid for her groceries. It was maybe $40, but as we helped her to her car, she told us something that broke our hearts. Her husband had recently died, and she was still learning to manage their finances alone. She'd been skipping meals because she was afraid to spend money. Emma's voice caught slightly. We spent an hour with her in that parking lot. James helped her set up a budget. I connected her with senior services in her area, and we made sure she had our contact information. But more importantly, we listened. We saw her. We treated her like she mattered. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. 2 weeks later, we got a call from her granddaughter. She said her grandmother had been so touched by our kindness that she had started volunteering at a local food bank. "I want to help other people the way those angels helped me," she had told her family. Emma smiled through her tears. "That's Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, and she's here tonight as one of our volunteer coordinators. She now manages our senior outreach program and has personally helped over 200 elderly individuals navigate resources in their communities." An elderly woman at table 6 stood up and waved, her face beaming with pride and purpose. "You see, kindness isn't just about solving problems. It's about awakening something in people. When we treat each other with dignity and compassion, we remind each other of our own capacity for goodness. We create permission for others to be their best selves." Emma looked out at the audience, making eye contact with individuals throughout the room. I know many of you are here tonight because you want to make a difference in the world. You want to help, to contribute, to leave things better than you found them. And I want you to know that the work we do at Sky Legend Cares Foundation is just one expression of that desire. The real work happens every day, in every interaction, in every moment when you choose kindness over indifference. She gestured toward the large screens around the room, which began displaying photos from the foundation's work. Families reuniting, children receiving treatment, elderly passengers being assisted, volunteers in action. Every person in these photos was helped not just by our foundation, but by the accumulated kindness of thousands of people who chose to care. Flight attendants who went above and beyond their job descriptions, gate agents who treated desperate families with patience and compassion, pilots who made extra announcements to help anxious children feel safe, volunteers who gave up their weekends to be present for strangers. The photos continued cycling, moments of connection, service, and hope, captured from around the country. But tonight, I want to challenge all of us to think bigger, not bigger programs or bigger budgets, though those are important, but bigger hearts, bigger capacity for seeing each other's struggles and responding with love instead of judgment. Emma's voice grew stronger, more passionate. In a world that often feels divided, that often encourages us to focus on what separates us, acts of kindness are revolutionary. They remind us that our well-being is connected, that caring for each other isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing we can do. She paused and looked directly at Sofia Martinez, who was sitting with her mother at one of the front tables. Sofia, would you come up here for a moment? The 12-year-old looked surprised but walked confidently to the podium. Emma knelt down to her level, speaking into the microphone so everyone could hear. Sofia, do you remember when you were 7 and you flew to Cleveland for your heart surgery? Yes, Miss Emma. I was scared, but you made me feel better. What do you want to do when you grow up? Sofia's voice was clear and determined. I want to be a nurse, so I can help kids like me feel brave when they're scared. Emma felt her heart swell with pride and love. And why do you want to do that? Because someone helped me when I needed it, and now I want to help other people too. The audience erupted in applause as Sofia hugged Emma and returned to her seat. When the noise died down, Emma continued, This is how the world changes. One act of kindness at a time, one person at a time, one moment at a time. Sofia's heart was healed by a team of brilliant doctors, but her spirit was shaped by the kindness of strangers who made sure she could get to those doctors. Emma looked out at the audience one more time, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a sacred truth. I used to think that success was about reaching your destination, about achieving your goals, about getting what you wanted. But I've learned something different. Success is about who you become on the journey. It's about whether you choose love over fear, generosity over selfishness, connection over isolation. She gestured toward Arthur, who was watching her with the pride of a father watching his daughter graduate. 5 years ago, Arthur Harrington could have chosen to simply say thank you and move on with his life. Instead, he chose to create something that would multiply the kindness he had received. That choice has changed thousands of lives, but it has also changed him. It's kept him connected to his purpose, to his values, to the reason he built his company in the first place. Arthur stood and nodded to the audience, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And all of you, by being here tonight, by supporting this work, by choosing to care about people you've never met, you're part of this multiplication of kindness. You're part of the solution to problems that might seem too big to solve. Emma's voice grew softer, more intimate, as if she were speaking to each person individually. Tomorrow morning you'll wake up and go about your lives. You'll encounter people who are struggling, people who are lonely, people who are scared. You'll have opportunities to choose kindness or indifference, compassion or convenience. And I want you to remember that those choices matter more than you might think. She paused, letting her words settle. The person serving your coffee might be working 3 jobs to support their family. The elderly person moving slowly in front of you might be dealing with chronic pain. The parent with the crying child on the airplane might be traveling to a family emergency. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Emma's voice grew stronger again. But here's the beautiful thing. You have the power to make those battles a little easier. A smile, a kind word, a moment of patience, an offer to help. These things cost you nothing, but they can change everything for someone else. She looked around the room one more time, making eye contact with as many people as possible. The flight I missed 5 years ago was supposed to take me to an interview for a job that would have paid $55,000 a year. I thought that was my big break, my chance to finally make something of myself. Instead, I discovered that I already was something. I was someone who would choose compassion over convenience, someone who would help a stranger even at great personal cost. Emma smiled, her face radiant with the knowledge of someone who had found their true purpose. That realization didn't come from the job offer or the salary or the recognition. It came from remembering who I was raised to be and choosing to honor that even when it was difficult. The resources and opportunities that followed were wonderful, but they weren't the real gift. The real gift was the reminder that kindness is not just something we do. It's who we are when we're at our best. The applause began slowly and built to a crescendo that seemed to go on forever. People were standing, wiping away tears, looking at each other with the kind of recognition that happens when someone articulates a truth you've always felt, but never quite been able to express. As the applause finally died down, Emma concluded with words that would be quoted in newspapers and shared on social media for weeks afterward. Kindness has no price tag, but it has immeasurable value. It costs nothing to give, but it's the most valuable thing you can offer. It requires no special skills, but it can work miracles. It asks for no recognition, but it creates legacies that last for generations. She paused one final time, her voice filled with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned one of life's most important lessons. Never hesitate to help someone in need, because sometimes the detour you take out of compassion is the very path meant to change your life forever. And sometimes it's the path meant to change theirs. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 10 minutes. As Emma stepped away from the podium, she was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories of kindness, their own moments of choosing compassion over convenience. But through the crowd, she caught sight of Arthur, who was making his way toward her with the determined pace of someone who had something important to say. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he simply pulled her into a hug, the kind of hug a grandfather gives a granddaughter who has exceeded every hope and expectation. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear, "for reminding me why I'm alive." Emma hugged him back, understanding that this moment was the completion of another circle, the circle that began with Robert Chen's kindness to a young Arthur Harrington, continued with Arthur's kindness to her, and would continue forward through every person whose life had been touched by the Foundation's work. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emma stood by the windows overlooking Elliott Bay, watching the lights of the ferries moving across the dark water. James joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. Emma leaned into him, feeling grateful for the warmth of his presence and the steadiness of his love. "I was just thinking about all the planes taking off right now, all over the world, all the people traveling toward reunions and farewells, toward new beginnings and hoped-for endings." She was quiet for a moment, watching a plane's lights disappear into the night sky. "And I was thinking about all the moments of choice that are happening right now. Someone deciding whether to help a stranger with their luggage, someone choosing whether to be patient with a frazzled gate agent, someone deciding whether to offer their seat to an elderly passenger." James squeezed her gently. "And?" Emma smiled, turning to face him. "And I was thinking about how grateful I am that I learned to choose love over fear, generosity over selfishness, connection over isolation, not because of what it got me, but because of who it helped me become." Behind them, the ballroom was being cleared by the hotel staff, but the energy of the evening lingered. The sense that something important had been shared, that hearts had been opened, that commitments had been made to choose kindness in the days and years ahead. As Emma and James walked hand in hand toward the elevator, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Miss Brooks, my name is David Kim. I was at your talk tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm supposed to fly to Chicago to close a business deal that will make me a lot of money, but will also result in layoffs for 200 people. After hearing your speech, I've decided to restructure the deal to save those jobs, even though it will cost me personally. I wanted you to know that your words tonight changed my mind about what success really means. Thank you." Emma showed the message to James, who read it and shook his head in amazement. "Do you realize what just happened?" he asked. "You probably saved 200 jobs with a 20-minute speech." Emma smiled, but her expression was thoughtful rather than triumphant. "It wasn't my speech that saved those jobs. It was David's choice to let kindness guide his business decisions. I just reminded him of something he already knew in his heart. As the elevator doors closed and they rode up to their room, Emma reflected on the evening and all the evening represented. 5 years ago, she had been a part-time waitress with big dreams and an empty bank account. Tonight, she had stood before 500 people and spoken about the multiplication of kindness, knowing that her words would ripple outward in ways she might never fully understand. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the change in her circumstances. It was the realization that the person who had missed that flight 5 years ago and the person who had spoken tonight were the same person. The kindness, the compassion, the willingness to put others' needs before her own convenience, those qualities had always been there. The resources and platform were new, but the heart was the same. In their hotel room, as Emma got ready for bed, she thought about tomorrow. There would be follow-up calls from tonight's event, new applications for foundation assistance to review, meetings with partner organizations, decisions about program expansions. The work of turning compassion into action would continue, one family at a time, one flight at a time, one act of kindness at a time. But there would also be smaller moments, opportunities to hold doors for strangers, to smile at harried parents, to treat service workers with respect and dignity. Those moments mattered just as much as the big initiatives, because they were the building blocks upon which everything else was constructed. As she drifted off to sleep in James's arms, Emma thought about the young woman who had run through Cleveland Hopkins International Airport 5 years ago, focused single-mindedly on catching a flight that she thought would change her life. That woman had been right about one thing. Her life was about to change dramatically, but she had been wrong about the mechanism. The change hadn't come from reaching her destination. It had come from choosing to stop, to turn around, to help a stranger in need. It had come from remembering that kindness wasn't a luxury she could afford only when life was going according to plan. It was a necessity, as essential as breathing, as fundamental as love itself. And now, 5 years later, as she fell asleep in a beautiful hotel room in a city she had come to love, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and work that mattered, Emma Brooks knew with absolute certainty that missing that flight had been the best thing that had ever happened to her. Not because of what she had gained, but because of who she had remained. Someone who would always choose compassion over convenience, love over fear, connection over isolation. Someone who understood that kindness was not just something you did, but something you were when you were at your very best. The circle of kindness that had begun with Robert Chen's loan to a young Arthur Harrington continued with Arthur's offer to Emma and expanded through the thousands of lives touched by the Sky Legend Cares Foundation, would continue to grow. It would ripple outward through Sofia Martinez's future career as a nurse, through Dr. Lisa Rodriguez's work in the pediatric emergency department, through David Kim's decision to save 200 jobs, through Mrs. Eleanor Patterson's volunteer work with seniors. And it would continue through every person who had been in that ballroom tonight, who had heard Emma's story and been reminded of their own capacity for kindness. Tomorrow they would go back to their lives and have opportunities to choose compassion, and some of them would make different choices because of what they had heard. That was how the world changed, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through the accumulated weight of millions of small choices to be kind, to be generous, to be present for each other in moments of need. Emma's last conscious thought before sleep was a prayer of gratitude, not for the success or the recognition or the resources, but for the reminder that she was part of something larger than herself, something beautiful and essential and eternal, the endless, ever-expanding circle of human kindness. And in airports around the world, planes continued to take off and land, carrying passengers toward their destinations, while gate agents and flight attendants and baggage handlers and security guards and coffee shop workers made thousands of small choices about how to treat the travelers in their care. Some chose kindness, some chose efficiency, some chose indifference. But because of one young woman who had once missed a flight to help a stranger, because of the foundation that grew from that moment, because of the story that had been shared that evening, a few more people than usual would choose kindness, and that would make all the difference in the world.